The agenda this week gave the gut its due, considered the implications of Bill C-51, and sought answers from the sugar industry. The agenda's Week in Review begins with a self-proclaimed heretic. Ayaan Hirsi Ali has become a polarizing figure on the international stage. On one side, she has championed the rights of Muslim women and Western values. On the other, she has been vilified by critics for her criticisms of Islam. She takes her critiques of Islam further with her new book called Heretic: Why Islam Needs a Reformation Now. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali joins us now in the studio. It's a great pleasure to meet you.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Not at all. You have been making this case for quite some time, and I've seen you obviously on many other programs, so it's a delight to finally meet you. Let's set the foundation for our conversation by just putting some of these numbers up. Sheldon, if you would. Here in the year 2010 is the latest numbers available. Muslims numbering 1.6 billion people worldwide. That's 23% of the world's population. If growth trends continue as they have, by the year 2050, the estimate is that Muslims will number 2.76 billion people worldwide. That's nearly 30%. Christians, just by way of comparison, now number a little over 31% of the global population, and the estimate is that that will hold steady. You start your book, Ayaan, with the following. My argument is that it is foolish to insist, as our leaders habitually do, that the violent acts of radical Islamists can be divorced from the religious ideals that inspire them. Instead, we must acknowledge that they are driven by a political ideology, an ideology embedded in Islam itself, in the holy book of the Quran, as well as the life and teachings of the Prophet Muhammad contained in the Hadith. Let me make my point in the simplest possible terms. Islam is not a religion of peace. Okay. You are off to a provocative start, if I may say. Of course, since 9/11, people in all sorts of positions of responsibility, be it the President of the United States to the local imam, have said Islam, when not perverted, is a peaceful religion. Why do you disagree with that?
Because I think Islam is not reformed. Islam did not go through a process of reformation. Islam did not go through a process of enlightenment. And so the Islam we have now is the unreformed Islam. And I think it's better for Muslims first and foremost, and for the rest of the world, to not provoke, but I urge that we start this process of reformation, which I think in many ways is actually underway.
More on that in a bit, this notion that it's underway. But just so I'm clear, you're not merely saying that it is the Islamists who have perverted the religion, and we know about that. You're saying Islam at its core is still a religion of violence?
Islam at its core contains elements of violence that we see play itself out on, the global arena. There is an Islam as it is, and there is an Islam as we wish it to be. So we are not there. We don't have that Islam of peace, but that Islam of peace can come about through this process of critical thinking. And I think that, and I don't want to go too fast for you, but instead of talking about many different Islams or the hijacking of Islam, I think the best thing to do is to acknowledge the diversity among Muslims. Come from different countries, different gender, color, social income, you name it. There's that great diversity of Muslims. And I think that it is more useful to distinguish between those Muslims, the ones who want, I call them the Medina Muslims.
Hold off on that, because we are going to get to that. We are going to, we've got a lot of time to talk here, and we're going to have this all unfold as we go along here. But again, just so I'm clear, I've heard so many people say Islam is at war with the West. A, do you believe that? And B, or is it more like Islam is at war with itself? Which is more accurate to say?
There is a set of Muslims who use Islam to go to war with other Muslims and to go to war with the West and other civilizations.
So Islam is at war with the West, or more likely itself?
Islam is at war with itself, and Islam has declared war on the West. And Islam has also declared war on all non-Muslims. It's not only the West, it's beyond the West.
All right, let's go back to the Protestant Reformation, Europe, hundreds of years ago. You talk about it in the book. What did you learn from examining that process?
Well, I mean, I've learned a lot. I've also learned that there's no agreement on what the Reformation was about and that whole process. But the most, I found three very important parallels with what I think, and that's why I think that Islamic Reformation is underway, or a Muslim Reformation is underway. First, what the printing press was to the Christian Reformation, the internet today and literacy. Literacy and the internet can be for the process of a Muslim Reformation. What these kings, some of them, of course, very despotic, were, and who were interested in changing the church because of their own self-interest and their own self-preservation. What we are seeing now are some despots in the Middle East and other countries that feel threatened by outfits like the Islamic State and are actually interested in change. I quote the new president of Egypt, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, when he goes to Al-Azhar University and demands a revolution in religion. And then finally, the urban elite, again, who felt that their interests were more protected by a reformed church. And the urban elite that we saw demonstrating during the Arab Spring, not only against the despots, but against Sharia law. So you have a combination of these three parallels already under play, and among many other factors, and that makes me so hopeful that this process of Reformation is underway.
Would you compare the Arab Spring to the Protestant Reformation?
I wouldn't compare it directly. There are many differences, many similarities. The context, everything is different. But what I find interesting about some of those people who are out there and who are protesting was that not only their rejection of Sharia law, but their determination to ask very difficult questions within the religion, and that's brand new.
Let me read an excerpt now. This is from a guy named Gerard Russell, Senior Fellow with the New America Foundation, as quoted in the New York Review of Books recently. He writes, "It has become common in Western circles, infused by the Whig interpretation of history, to speak of the need for a Muslim Luther to introduce liberalism in Islam. The troubles of the Muslim world, however, are not those of pre-Reformation Europe, but rather of the Reformation in full swing. Hundreds of splintering congregations are seeking to suppress the accretions of popular religion and return to the letter of the original scriptures, denouncing and warring with one another and the resurgent hierocrats of Shia Islam in Iran. Nobody speaks for all Muslims, and political power is sought on the back of religious piety. If one is to engage in the prescribing of solutions for Islam, a presumptuous excursion into the realm of the hypothetical, and to be done with due humility, then the fall of the Ottomans inspires a different thought. Perhaps we should encourage our Muslim friends to seek not a Luther, but a Pope." Do you think it's desirable to find a Pope who can speak for all Muslims?
I think, first of all, it's very important that we clarify what we mean by a reformation. I think in the Christian sense, it meant, obviously, and that was Luther's mission, that you forget about the church and you as a believer go straight to the New Testament and live by that testament as literally as possible. And if you take that definition of a reformation, then what you see is what the people we've now come to call radical extremists, whether they're violent or non-violent, it doesn't matter, are actually seeking to try and live by the letter of the Quran, literally. So that's not the definition of a reformation in this book. Mm-hmm. In this book, the definition of a reformation is change. It is to reform, to identify what is wrong and then reform it, change it, modify it, renovate the House of Islam. That's my...
Would part of the renovation of the House of Islam involve creating, for lack of a better expression, a Pope?
See, that is what I think is much more unrealistic, because now Islam covers not only 1/5 of humanity, but they live in different nation states, different groups, different sects, you name it, and I think that that is much more unrealistic. I think with the internet, with literacy, it's better to invest in a process that is bottom-up, that's grassroots, where individuals learn to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong, even if their God and their prophet tells them to do what is wrong.
What Hirsi Ali and others do is that they gather news items from around the world where somebody is misusing Islamic terminology. and then they're blaming that on Islam. Sometimes they're not even using Islamic terminology. For example, women were raped in recent demonstrations in Egypt. So Hirsi Ali cites that as an example of misogyny in Islam. If she said that some Muslim societies have this misogyny, then she would be right. But if she's saying that Islam as a religion is to be blamed for this, then this is actually turning the table upside down, because in Islam, rape can never be justified. It's definitely not allowed.
So
it is haram or prohibited.
You agree with Barack Obama, who says ISIL is not Islamic?
I would agree with him, definitely.
Ali? Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that in the sense that these verses, I mean, whether, you know, I know you're saying that they're misused, but the thing is, these verses are in there. I mean, even in the Old Testament, you know, when it says in Leviticus 20:13 that, you know, two men who lay together must be killed, I mean, those verses are there. I mean, there's only a few ways in which you can use and misuse them. And there are similar verses like that in the Quran, not with regard to homosexuality, but, you know, with other things, with the violence especially. So there's this idea that I think, and a lot of...
Can you cite one?
Well, I can cite many. Like, you know, 8:12 actually talks about, you know, we'll end up getting into a scriptural discussion, which I don't want to get into.
But that's important, because if you speak about the Leviticus verse against homosexuality, some modern interpreters will try to contextualize that verse within its historical context.
I agree with you. And I think
more than this, if you cite a verse of the Quran, you must do the two things: put it in its historical context, and also put it within the context of the book as a whole. For example,
well, when it comes to the historical context, I think it comes to all the clerics. All the clerics have different interpretations. And there are many different historical contexts. Some of them are very favorable to, you know, what we're trying to do, a more peaceful interpretation, and others are not as favorable. They're more fundamentalist. So, you know, when it comes to that, you know, there's this quote that, you know, I have that I like to say when I talk to a lot of sort of progressive and moderate people who want to reinterpret the Quran in a way, and that is, put down the Quran and listen to me. You know, and that's the idea that a lot of the interpreters, you know, for instance, who are all supposed to be fallible, they're all humans. They will often they'll like do anything, just don't read the Quran literally. Like the words of God, the way that they're written, just don't read them that way. And I understand why they do that, because in a lot of ways it's terrifying. And that is what a lot of these militant groups are quoting. You can't say that's not Islamic.
We have an enemy staring us right in the face. And we haven't even been able to address that issue.
What is that enemy?
So that enemy is political Islam. It's the politicization of my faith. My faith has been stolen and replaced with this violent ideology that is passing itself off as Islam. We have to change the narrative. That's what we have to do.
Well, I mean, I grew up in Libya, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and then I came over here, and the narrative everywhere is very different. And one of the reasons that I ended up losing my faith is because with all of these interpretations and then reading the actual Quran, which is the same everywhere, I kept on wondering, I mean, is it the extremists who are corrupting Islam, or is it the moderates who are sanitizing it? You know, is it the idea over here that the narrative is that the extremists are sort of like hijacking it, or they're corrupting and they're taking it in a different way? But it is also possible that many of the moderates are misinterpreting the verses as well. I mean, if you, and there are many examples of this, and again, don't want to get into scriptural discussions.
No, but that's important, Ali. If you say that, if we want to know who is sanitizing or misinterpreting, then we need to know what the verse is. For example, you mentioned Surah 8, verse number 12. What does it say?
Oh, Surah 8, verse number, do we want to get into that? Like, Surah verse 8, number 12 says that that God said, I will cast terror. God said to the angels, I will cast terror into the hearts of the disbelievers, so strike them upon the neck and strike off every fingertip. And then the next verse, 8:13, and that's relating to the Battle of Badr, which I know that you're going to
How do you know all this? I know why he knows it. It's his job to know it. How do you know all this?
That is for the same reason I became an atheist. It's because I read all of it. Like after that's the
but the
easiest way to
important
become
thing here, Steve, is that Ali has contextualized it now. He said that refers to a battle scene. So if instructions are given in the battle scene, imagine...
but I didn't finish. Let me just finish.
And the next
verse,
the very
next verse. So I mean, generally the counter argument is that this is about the Battle of Badr. And you know, what we do is, in conversation too, we use examples, and then we say, this is the example, and this is what's going to happen. The very